I'd like to run one last question from us and then some public, so forgive us if we take a few more minutes of your time. In 1975, Senator Frank Church, who we just talked about with the Church Committee, appeared on NBC and said, if this government ever became a tyranny, if a dictator ever took charge in this country, the technological capacity that the intelligence community has given the government could enable it to impose total tyranny, and there would be no way to fight back, because the most careful effort to combine together in resistance to the government, no matter how privately it was done, is within the reach of the government to know. This was 1975, and you've been saying this too. Do you think with Trump in power now, this warning will turn into a reality?
I think the focus on Trump is a mistake. You can look anywhere, look at any newspaper, look at any sort of public commentator, and you can see all of the criticisms of the Trump policies and administrations and all of the issues that they have there, right? They're clear, it's obvious. Yes, we are in uncharted times. Yes, we are facing a period not just of localized risk, but of systemic risk. But what should we actually be looking at, right? Faith in elected leaders to fix our problems is the mistake that we keep repeating. When President Obama was elected to the White House, he said all of the right things, right? He said he was going to make a more equal America. We were going to move into a period of cooperation rather than partisanship. He said he was going to close Guantanamo on day one of his administration. It's still going to be open on his last day of his presidency. He said there's going to be no more warrantless wiretapping in America. We don't do that. We don't need that. That's not who we are. And in fact, he expanded it. He made it worse. It went deeper. It got better. It got more sophisticated. It got more pervasive. And it continues, right? If we're hoping for a champion, if we're waiting for a hero, we will be waiting forever. Because it's not a politician that you're looking for. It's the people in this room. It's you. It's the person sitting next to you. All of us have a responsibility. We can't fix it by ourselves as individuals, but we don't need to. What we have to do is make one change, a small change, a positive change that can be replicated, that can be shared. We need to create our ideas. We need to think about these problems. We need to identify not that Trump is a bad person, but why he is so threatening. And we need to start creating defenses for it. Moreover, we need to realize that defense is not enough. We need to create an offense for free and open society. We need to recognize that one of the central problems right now is one of debate. Words no longer have the same meaning that they once meant. We hear words like terrorism, and we go, ooh, that's terrible. As long as it's terrorism, we have to stop everything. And when you think about terrorism like a normal person, that makes a lot of sense. Nobody wants people flying planes into towers. Nobody wants people detonating bombs in marketplaces or on subways or shootings in the street, right? But terrorism doesn't have a single agreed upon definition. There are governments charging people with terrorism who are simply acting in ways that are traditionally considered to be political protest, right? Many governments, particularly the British government is particularly bad here, where they consider any threat to sort of that systemic stability, even if it's an act of journalism, even if it's an act of speech, suddenly is transformed into an act of terrorism, right? But it's not just terrorism. It also happens on the positive side of our language in addition to the negative side of our language. When we think about things like freedom and openness, democracy, liberty, and human rights, right? We've moved from a belief that as long as things are proper and appropriate, as long as things are moral, they're sustainable, they're supportable, they're things that we should back, to a belief that legality is the same thing as morality. As long as the government says someone broke the law, we infer, we believe instinctively it means they did the wrong thing. But ladies and gentlemen, sometimes the only moral action, the only moral choice is to break the law. Germans know this far better than many other countries. But it's not a uniquely German problem. In the United States, whether we're talking about the abolition of slavery, the prohibition of alcohol, whether we're talking about the enfranchisement of women, allowing them to vote, all of these activities were considered to be threats to stability of the days. These were things that terrorized institutions and government officials. These made these individuals uncomfortable. It made them feel vulnerable. It made them feel threatened. And you know what? That was exactly the right choice. When people are progressing the boundaries, when they're expanding the borders of human rights, right? That always begins as a riot against orthodoxy. Whether it happens in the street, whether it happens in the newspaper, whether it happens in writing, whether it happens on the TV, it is a contest against the status quo. You have to remember that all of these injustices that happened all throughout history, the worst things that you can imagine, whether it's in your domestic history or international history, were legal at the time. Abuses of human rights are always legal in the national context when the government wants to do those kind of things, at least for the period of operation. It may be years later that it's condemned. It may be years later that it's disowned. It may be years later that someone sees the inside of the courtroom. But power is its own law. And we have to think about, how do we remediate that? How do we make things a little bit better there? And this is a difficult question. I can't claim that I have the answer, but I think one of the things that we start forgetting about is to recirculate basic principles, basic ideas that everybody needs to share if we're really going to live in a free society, if we're really going to live in a free world. And that's that human rights belong to everyone. The worst excesses of the US surveillance system are premised upon a single idea, which is that Americans get one set of rights, everybody else gets basically no rights. And you know, if you're an American, that might sound fine. And that's the reason that these policies still enjoy some support, is they go, well, it's not happening to me, I don't care, right? I'm not the one being threatened. But 95% of the world's population lives beyond the borders of the United States. And the same is true of practically every country, right? The percentages change here and there, but it's a big world. And we have a lot of people. And if we're going to protect the rights of anyone, we have to be able to protect the rights of everyone. And this gets back to thinking about, well, why do we have rights? What are we protecting? What are we trying to create? What are we envisioning? Where are we trying to go? And I would argue this is the idea of liberty. But if you ask people, ask the person next to you what liberty means to them, right? They might not be able to articulate it very clearly. Everybody will have a different answer, right? And we need to think again about what liberty means today. I think liberty is the right to liberty is the right to act without permission. It's the ability to take a choice without worrying what it's going to look like in some government databases, without having to worry about what some government bureaucrat is going to do. Are they going to be upset? Are they going to retaliate? Are they going to do something that will impact your rights, your freedoms, right? Liberty is being able to live day to day, moment to moment, in an instant, from your own head, from your own self, from your own community, thinking about your family, rather than thinking about structures that owe you no loyalty, that see you as more of a potential threat than a potential ally, right? And this is something that really isn't a solution, right? But it is a beginning. If we can agree that in a free country, in an open society, the number of times people have to ask permission to do things, the times people have to register to do things, the times that people have to worry that government officials are going to be trawling through their web history. They're going to be looking at the records of who was in this room right now, because I hate to tell you, ladies and gentlemen, if you have a cell phone on you right now, you've left a permanent record of being at this talk. Not that it's going to get you thrown in jail, but that it's discoverable. And an intelligence agent who might be sitting like me in Hawaii, or sitting in Darmstadt or Ramstein or one of these other areas, Bad Aibling, could look at these and make inferences about who you are, about what you believe, about what you're likely to do. I don't believe that we should live in a world where every time you pick up the phone to call someone you love, to talk to a friend, to share an idea, to just tell someone about what was happening in your day, that you need to think, what's this going to look like? That is many things, ladies and gentlemen, but I would argue that that is fundamentally illiberal. It is fundamentally unfree, and it is fundamentally unjust, and it should change.
Ursula from Karlsruhe, how does a normal day for you look like?
I do talks in Munich. No, but seriously, one of the most extraordinary things about my life past 2013 is that I ended up in exile, right? My government did absolutely everything it could to make sure that I wouldn't be heard. They canceled my passport when I was flying to Latin America, which would be considered to be a fairly neutral region of the world, when they knew I was transiting through Russia. We don't know why, right? The government won't actually reveal their decision-making at the time here. But no one had informed me my passport had been canceled by the time I left. The government of Hong Kong has said that the US government might have been in the process, but they hadn't actually officially canceled it so far as they were concerned. But by the time I landed in Russia, I could no longer travel. And when I was trapped in the Russian airport, I couldn't leave, right? I didn't say, hey, let's go into Russia, this is good enough. I applied for asylum in 21 different countries around the world, one of which was Germany, right? Others were France, places like Norway. All of them found reasons not to respond or to say no, except those countries, those neutral countries in Latin America. When it was heard that maybe the Bolivian president, Evo Morales, during a trade summit in Russia, might secretly take me back to Bolivia to enjoy asylum there, which, by the way, the United States itself recognizes what they consider to be a fundamental human right to seek and enjoy asylum. This is in the Universal Declaration of Human Rights, the International Covenant on Civil and Political Rights, and many other international agreements, which in the US systems of law are actually superior to statutory obligations, superior to, for example, the Espionage Act. They're on a higher tier of law, with the Constitution considered the supreme law of the land, because the Constitution has provisions in it about the treatment of treaties. But despite this, when they thought I might be in a presidential plane that has diplomatic immunity that can't be interfered with, crossing Europe to go to Latin America, 4 European countries closed their airspace to block Evo Morales from traveling back home, just on the mere rumor that I was on board. And this meant I couldn't travel. I still can't travel because they were afraid of what I might say. They were afraid of what people might think if they heard other opinions, other viewpoints, right? Now, this is a long way of saying that, yeah, now I live in exile. And, you know, you would think it would be really difficult. And there are costs. You know, I'm not home. I'm away for the holidays. It's difficult to see my family. And of course, there's a lot that anybody misses about being at home, you know, even speaking their own language on the street, right? Russia's a very different society. But while I put my head down at night on a pillow in Russia, I wake up and I speak every day around the world. I'm part of a different conversation, a global conversation that today, thanks to technology, can no longer be stopped. And this, for me, is a source of hope. Because for the longest period, governments loved exile. It was their favored tool, right, for countering revolutionaries and radicals. Because if they executed people, right, it would lose them favorability. People would think the government was too harsh. But if they simply forced people out, kept them outside the borders, wouldn't allow them to enter freely on penalty of imprisonment or death, they could stop the conversation. And for them, that was the most important part. But those old bad tools of political repression are beginning to fail. And not just for the United States, ladies and gentlemen, because the United States is not, contrary to what may be popular in some radical sources or circles, the biggest, dangerous, most bullying threat to human rights in the world. There are other countries that are even worse, countries that are more intrusive. We have new surveillance laws being passed in Russia that are incredibly extreme. Russians call it the Big Brother law. And if Russians are calling it the Big Brother law, you got to watch out. The United Kingdom passed the most extreme surveillance measure in the history of the Western world in a free and open society that was backed by their now prime minister, called the Investigatory Powers Bill, right? Doesn't sound particularly threatening, doesn't sound particularly dangerous, but it encoded and enshrined in law the mass surveillance regime, the kind of bulk collection that we were discussing before. All kinds of different government agencies in the UK can now trade around people's web histories, not just the intelligence services, not just MI5, not just MI6, not people you would think like James Bond types, and not just police, but places like tax agencies, places like health administrations, like local bureaucracies, simple government agencies that should never have access to this type of information now can, because it's being collected and it's being protected and it's considered the proper action of government. We see in countries like China, they're passing new surveillance legislation under the same guise of anti-terrorism legislation that the United States has used, sort of political cover for curtailing rights. And when they were challenged on it, Chinese officials said, "Why are you bothering us? We're doing the same thing the United States did." And the sad thing here is that they have a point. This should never be the state of the world, right? The reason we were so successful coming through the Cold War, the reason the Berlin Wall falling down was such an extraordinary accomplishment, not just for people in Germany, but people throughout Eastern Europe and beyond, was we had a clash of cultural values where there were governments on one side that said, we will stop at nothing, particularly in terms of domestic surveillance and things like that. Organizations such as the Stasi, which would be running extraordinarily huge informant networks throughout communities and things like that. And on the other side, we had governments that would accept some restraints and would say this was actually a distinguisher. This was what made them good. This was made them just. This was how you could see that their example was worth emulating, because they could foreclose upon these methods, at least to some extent. We know it's not true in all cases because of what we just described earlier with Martin Luther King Jr. But largely, in the most aggressive sense, they could say, we don't need these powers. We reject these powers because they are corrosive, not just to civil participation, right? Not just to what people feel in their communities, but to trust in government. If people can't trust us, if people can't identify with us, we can't be successful. And this is something that you see in most societies around the world that have serious struggles with low-level corruption, right? The question is, when somebody encounters upon a police officer, what do they think? Do they think this is a problem? Do they think they need to get a bribe ready? Or do they feel safer, right? I grew up in a mindset in the United States, justified or unjustified, just the way I was raised, the political systems into which I was indoctrinated. When I saw a police officer, I felt better, right? That's no longer the case for me now. But not just for me. A lot of people around the United States look at police and they go, these don't look like police anymore. These look like soldiers. We have military equipment that's being transferred to police. And again, when we look at these things, when we look at how we live, when we look at the choices we have, you ask me, how do I live every day? I wake up in the morning and I smile, glad for the decisions that I took before. Yes, they cost a lot, right? Yes, they were not enough. Yes, we got new reforms, but they don't make a dent in the level of injustice that we see sort of surging around the world, across borders, in every place, in every region right now. But I have an idea of what I can do next. And I would ask you, turn that question around on yourself. I don't mean this as a criticism. I mean this as an opportunity. And think, how are you living your life? When you wake up in the morning, you think about going to work, right? You think about what you've got to do, your obligations to your family, having to go to the grocery store, whatever, what shows are on tonight. This is normal human life. Nobody looks down on you for this. Nobody should look down on you for this. But think about the opportunities that you have, right? Because there are no heroes. Nobody's going to save you, right? There are only heroic actions. There are only heroic choices. There are only people who moment by moment see bad things and recognize, maybe I can do something. Maybe I can't fix everything, but maybe I can make progress. Maybe I can make things better. Maybe I am the one that I'm waiting for. And as soon as you start thinking like that, you'll realize that you are.
Edward Snowden. Edward Snowden, human rights advocate, activist, and whistleblower, thank you so much for joining us today.
Maybe next year we'll do this in person.
I will be there.